All right, this is part two of my discussion of the free will issue. And it's going to be about the history of the debate and the terms and why they seem to us the way they do, how we sort of got into our camps about determinism and free will. Just to do a brief recap from part one, I have said that I believe there's a resolution to the debate over free will and determinism. And I say that because I believe there's a more direct way to get at the value underlying free will that people are trying to defend with the term free will. In other words, free will resolves to significance. The value that we're defending when we defend free will is significance. And I've said that free will is not truly the last bastion of defense against insignificance. And determinism, as I'll show, is not truly a threat to significance. So we should be able to let go of the attachment to these terms and look at the issue more clearly. And I've also referenced we're going to talk about the significance of choice and the significance of the impact of your will in your life and on the world. There's a more fundamental level of significance, and if you don't believe in significance of the earth, significance of your choices, your life, your consciousness, that's not going to be completely covered by this, and that's where I said in the first one you need to go to my book, which is called Purpose and Form, the Necessary Basis of All Ethics. I think I'll reference that a couple times throughout this talk as well. And just so you have the title, it's there, it's on Amazon. So anyhow, we're not going to talk about whether life itself is actually significant or whether our consciousness is significant. We're going to do one step into that of we want significant choice. That's what we want when we want free will. We want significant impact on our lives and the ability to shape the future. So we're going to do an overview of sort of the history of these terms. It's not a rigorous history by any means. It's not a history lesson, and it's not even necessarily accurate. It's just off the cuff, get a gist of the past of how this argument has developed. So free will as a term, the term free will, in my understanding, predates the term determinism, because the idea of free will came out of religious philosophy as an answer to the problem of evil and our responsibility in the world. So obviously the issue of determinism is implied within that philosophy, because if you're talking about free will, one of the other options is, well, we're just determined and God controls everything, right? So determinism was there in that sense, but as a philosophy as a whole and as the title determinism, that came later. So, and it came later and was built up and popularized as science, and especially the Newtonian paradigm within science, gained strength. So especially from the Enlightenment up until the beginning of the 1900s. But for a long time, free will was it. The core doctrine that most people believed was we have free will. And so even beyond just the actual real desire for that core value of significance and to keep significance and defend it, I think people also were just, I guess, indoctrinated into the desire for being on the side of free will, because that was the philosophy for hundreds of years, probably, if not thousands, or at least over 8,000. So today, it's much more of a mixed bag, technically speaking, and there's many reasons behind that. But determinism, even in the form that was most supported by the Newtonian paradigm, which is technically past, that form of determinism still exists as a large force in philosophy and culture for essentially the same reason that Newtonian thought still largely holds sway. The ideas and implications of post-Newtonian ideas like quantum physics and relativity really aren't understood, even in the scientific community, to their fullest extent and all their entailments. They aren't digested for sure, and they aren't disseminated through the public to have a significant foothold within the collective consciousness of our society. So even though we're technically past a lot of the specific points of like Newtonian determinism, which we'll talk about, it really still is almost, I would say, in most cases, the dominant philosophy within sort of the secular community. As I've said, to varying degrees, quantum physics and other modern views on reality actually weaken the case for determinism in at least some of their interpretations. But say if quantum mechanics weakens it, the thing is we don't know which interpretations of quantum mechanics and which implications that branch off that are really right. And so while some people propose quantum physics to be, say, the ultimate proof of a free consciousness and mental superiority over the material world, that's really just one avenue of possible interpretation, and there are others that are equally contended by top-level scientists. So we don't really have like a firm discount of determinism. We don't have a firm thing that says it's not determinism and it's definitely this other thing. So since we don't really have a cohesive answer on the subject, most people just default to and stick with the older models. Or they haven't heard exactly how the new models disprove what's wrong in the old models. So again, we're technically past the Newtonian paradigm, but we're really still operating under it in most cases. And then that's understandable, because having some cohesive philosophy is better than essentially having nothing. And even though we have specific ways we know that Newtonianism is wrong, we don't really have the specific ways that we know the next step alternative and can delineate it and say, here are its philosophical entailments, and here's how it weighs on free will versus determinism. And since we don't have that sort of positive next step, it's really easy for the criticisms and the uprooting of Newtonianism not to take place as much, because there's not somewhere else to go yet. So essentially, Newtonianism and old school determinism is de facto the reigning view. And it as it has been for the last several centuries. And this view, this very traditional Newtonianist determinism, is seeing the entire universe and every aspect of it as a mechanical operation that is entirely deterministic, entirely causal and predictable, given assuming you have enough processing power, number one, to do the calculations, and two, enough data and the ability to put all that data in simultaneously about the state of the universe as it is. The thought was, well, if you could meet those requirements, you could predict everything that would happen after that. Or if you could understand the exact requirements, get 100% of the data on the beginning of the universe, you could predict everything that did happen up until this point and everything that would happen, because it's just a mechanistic thing and we understand the laws of physics to the point that that's just everything's inevitable, essentially, from the laws of physical causation. So that has been the model for hundreds of years for most of the Western and especially secular world, but even to some extent the religious world was greatly influenced by that. So what this did was it made humans and everything else piano keys to the laws of physics, going back to Dostoevsky's quote his passage from the introduction, where people are horrified to think of themselves as just these passive agents that get moved along by inanimate forces, and everything we think of as like our consciousness and our will is really just a mechanical process. So that was the understanding, and to some degree very much still is. So the future was entirely predictable from the past, at least theoretically, including your thoughts and behavior. So going back to the quote from Spinoza, when he said, "A man thinks himself free because he is conscious of his wishes and appetites, whilst at the same time he is ignorant of the causes by which he is led to wish and desire." So you're completely caused, you're completely determined. Even your thoughts, your desires, your ideas, your inspirations, you can't see it, but they're all just playing out the results of a physical, mechanical, essentially, process. And Leibniz was responding to the same thing. They were both around in the same sort of age where determinism was ascending or had gained ascendancy. And Leibniz was responding to the sort of the question of the day, which was, perhaps it is certain from all eternity I shall sin, essentially tomorrow, or in the next moment I'm going to do something, and it's just inevitable. So his quote was responding to that without denying determinism, but he had a different take on that, on the consequences of it. So this was where we were at for centuries, up from the Enlightenment up until now, essentially. And there's been plenty of evidence given in favor of the philosophy of determinism. And today, people can still much more readily call to mind this type of model and this evidence, like thinking about physical causation and the laws of the universe and things we can predict. That's much easier for us to call to mind and to think in those terms than it is, say, to bring to mind speculative interpretations and the implications of those of quantum mechanics. Not many people just have that readily to mind, and they can say, well, it might not be quite determinism. And even then, as I've said, that's not, quantum mechanics isn't like a sealed, firm refutation of determinism in any way. Some people hope that it will be, but we're not there yet. So determinism at this point is more definitive, and to most people it feels more like science. And like the speculations off of quantum mechanics really, I mean, quantum mechanics itself doesn't feel like science. Einstein basically called parts of it voodoo and black magic. So it's pretty out there in general, but then speculating on it and how it applies to philosophy and consciousness, it just doesn't have the ring of like firm, tested, repeatable, knowable science the way that, even though it's technically incorrect, Newtonian science did, of like, we can drop something and we can measure the speed of its descent, and we can predict the way that objects will collide and whatnot. So it has been shown that the Newtonian model is incorrect, but it has not been firmly shown that determinism in general, or even in an altered form, is incorrect. So we don't have a firm rejection of determinism, as I've said. So, and it's not all one-sided. It's not that Newtonianism supported determinism, and now we're in a new age where we've seen some flaws in that, and we're not seeing any new proof for deterministic viewpoints. Actually, the theory of relativity in many ways seems to imply aspects of determinism. So one thing it is possibly showing is that the future already exists, which is part of the deterministic argument. A lot of free will people either believe in sort of like a process theory where the future is indeterminate, is non-existent yet until we get there. But within relativity, there's these weird situations where what is like the future from one perspective is the present from another perspective. And like if you speed up, you go into the future faster. I'm not going to get it 100% right, but the upshot of it is like the future is sort of subjective and variable. And so that seems to imply that the future must already exist. Like in order for it to show up faster for you from one perspective and not show up later for someone else, it has to already be there. So because the future can vary in these ways, it seems like the future must already be there. So that gives weight to the determinism arguments where the future is already there. So you can't change what's already there, right? So again, we're not out of the woods. We don't have this clear break where Newtonianism was wrong, so therefore determinism's wrong. Not at all. So beyond the theory of relativity, basic physics in general has been almost exclusively atemporal, operates perfectly without time. And that has given most physicists either a run for a loop or the implication that time is probably not an absolute category of existence. There's probably levels that transcend time, and which would imply the future is existent out there despite our removal from it or our inability to see it. So, and not that any of that was the correct way to understand relativity or not to, it's just one avenue of thought that has been taken from the theories of relativity. I believe I read it in Brian Greene's book, The Fabric of the Cosmos, but I could be wrong about that. I know, I think his name's Richard Mueller in his book, Now the Physics of Time, talks about it some as well. So I'm probably pulling from both of those sources on that. Anyhow, whereas it used to be the case that free will was just it, free will was the core philosophy, essentially since the Enlightenment, we've become increasingly burdened with the prospect of determinism, including evidence for it, or what seems to be evidence for it. And our understanding has changed in some ways, but we don't understand the ways that it has changed and what it implies. So we're not out of the woods, as I've said. So throughout this growth of the scientific points of view, and which were heavily deterministic for most of their progression, the reaction of religion in the West has mostly been just dogmatic, just nope, free will, end of story, anything else is blasphemy. And for the most part, if you're going to talk about it with people, that's essentially, not literally, but that's essentially what people will say is just, no, it has to be free will. You know, they'll probably be more stressed about it because part of them knows that's not an acceptable answer, but they don't know what else they can believe because, again, we think free will means significance and determinism means insignificance. That's not what they mean. We're not under threat of losing our significance by looking at these terms and arguments. Just reiterating that. And this really reflects sort of the general contention between science and religion that has characterized the West since the Enlightenment. Science comes up with evidence and reasons and explanations, and mostly Western religion has just been like, nah, nope, it's how we say it is. I don't think that's a secret. I think, that's not to say that that's the only thing that's been happening. And that's not to say that science is the best thing ever. It's just that's sort of the general pattern that has progressed to this point. So, as we know, the general impasse of science and religion, as well as the specific one of determinism versus free will, this is a difficult impasse. And no matter how certain we are that we may be on the right side of the issue, it's still difficult. Even if you want to say that the difficulty is caused by the stupidity of other people, it's still a real difficulty that you're running into. It's still a difficult problem. And it would be helpful if we could find a way to work through it better. And again, that's why it would be silly for me to say, well, my solution is free will, or my solution is determinism. Great, I've got a solution, but regardless of whether it's true and useful or not, I've lost half the listeners because they want one camp or the other. But again, going back to the reason I'm making the video, because I have a different answer. My approach is to look at the values behind each term in philosophy to see what's really being defended and really being supported, and to see what people really want. Again, I've said I think that's significance. I think we're arguing about significance, or we're worried about significance and anxious about significance when we think we're arguing about something else, and it clouds the water. So, fortunately, it turns out that what people want in the free will camp is not actually threatened by anything that determinists have to say. In fact, the critique that the determinists offer is actually in support of the value. It's in support of significance of what free will people want to support. So in this case, we can actually have our cake and eat it too. We get everything we want, and that's why I'm making this video, is because if that wasn't the answer, and my answer was free will or my answer was determinism, then there's no point in trying to make a video, because the only people who will listen to it are the people who already agree. But the reason why there's hope for this video is because nobody loses. We get everything we want, and we just have to trust that for a second, and like be able to take a breath and take some space from just being attached to the technical terms and like the history of their ideas, and just be able to talk about rehash it. Be like, wait, what are we actually talking about? What are we concerned about, and why are we concerned about that? And can we talk about it in a clearer way, and like not change the definitions, but recover, go over again the definitions and our assumptions and stuff like that. So, and so I'm hoping by sharing this up front that the discussion actually becomes possible. So the value again is significance, and specifically the significance of our choice. When you think about what's behind the free will issue, it's the significance of our choices, the significance of our lives, and especially the significance of our consciousness, and maybe our efforts, which would be a subset of our consciousness. When you look at the critique that determinism is actually making, and the evidence they proposed against sort of the phantom position that free will has reactionarily put up, it turns out that the determinists are actually supporting the very same significance in our choices and even our consciousness that the free will people want to preserve. But to the determinists' detriment, they've been caught up in the reactionary thing too. And people who have supported determinism have proposed that they actually are against the significance of consciousness and like attention to choice and effort in life and stuff like that. So people have said that, and some people think that is what they're arguing for when they're arguing for determinism. Fortunately, they're wrong. So let's take a breath and take some space from the terms and like what we think they mean and what we think they stand for. And we're going to look at the terms analytically and separate them from their historical assumptions and baggage. And instead of saying free will means this list of things we assume it means or associate with it already, same thing for determinism, not taking those things. We're just going to start with an analysis of the terms themselves and see what they imply or what they might imply. So, the easiest way to do this is, it's easy assuming that I've made a good case for the core values are not at risk. You're going to be significant. Your choice is going to matter. As long as we've established that and people are willing to believe that, then I think the easiest way to begin is to jump into it, right? Into the deep end. We don't have free will based on the analytical meaning of the term itself. We know we don't have that kind of free will, and we actually don't want that kind of free will. Again, I'm talking about the term and where it's gone in its development of associations has become misleading. Now, we don't have free will, and we know we don't have it because I cannot fly and because I do get hungry. If my will was truly free, then I could will anything I wanted, including flying. I can't do that, therefore I don't have free will. Also, for my will to be free and undetermined, right, it must not be caused, because if my will is caused, then it's part of causation, has and follows theoretically at least some laws, and therefore could be predicted. So in order for my will to be truly free and undetermined, I can't respond to the needs of my body, right? If I respond, that would be my will acting to hunger by eating, that's my choice, then I'm determined by the causes of my body, at least in those cases. So then I'm caused, then I'm determined, right? If I were truly to have free will, I would have to be uninfluenced and unaffected by the causes of the world, including my internal organism of like hunger, thirst, the need to breathe. These have a causal effect on my consciousness and my will. So we are determined, at least in that way. So we don't want this kind of free will because we would die. If our will was disconnected, that's what uncaused would mean. If your will is not caused, which would mean it's not predictable, it would have to be disconnected from our body and its needs. So then it wouldn't be determined, but it would be irrelevant. It would be insignificant, and it would be, I mean, even maybe it might be worse than insignificant, it would be detrimental. The only way to survive would be to like randomly and disconnectedly and disinterestedly respond to the needs of our body in perfect coordination as though we were determined by it. So like you would just have to randomly be eating when your body needs to eat, but not because your body needs to eat, and breathing without feeling the need to breathe, even if you did need to breathe, but you would be breathing anyways because you're willing it freely, but not because you need it. So this is just impossible. This is not like people who don't feel pain burn themselves severely, and get injured enormously. If we didn't have any input on any level, which would make us free of being determined, it wouldn't work. We would die. Or the other option, if you can consider it, we wouldn't be in this world. Like if we had free will and we could just will to fly, people would be willing all sorts of things, walking on the ceilings, spontaneously manifesting cities or demanifesting cities, whatever. It would be utter chaos, and it wouldn't be this world. It'd be a place where all the cheat codes were on, and there would be no significance to anything, because there'd be nothing would have an effect on you, right? Because you can do anything and nothing matters, nothing's significant. That's just chaos. If there's just the input of will without the input of causes, like there's a chain of causation and there's a completely disconnected will arbitrarily inputting causes into it, but not being connected to or affected by it in any way, that's chaos. That's not a place that you actually want to be. Now, of course, there are some people who think that they don't like this world and they think they would like to live in that other chaos world, or like lucid dream world or whatever. It wouldn't actually be lucid dream world. It would be just utter chaos. But anyways, this isn't the discussion for you if you're that person. My book might help you because you need some other things sorted out. But notice that even in the world of like make-believe chaotic willing, the will somehow still has real effects on external reality. Like you only want that because you can actually affect causation in that imaginary world. Like if your will was completely free, like not a one-way street, just didn't have input or output, it would be irrelevant. It would just be this sideshow dream going on here, and then your body would be this wind-up clock doing its own thing, completely disconnected. So there'd be no connection. In this imaginary world where we think we can will whatever we want but not be affected, we still want to have the effect on the world. We don't want the world to have the same rules on us of affecting us. But if you weren't connected to that world, if you weren't connected to that chain of causation or web of causation, you would have no interest in affecting it. Or at least no significant interest, and certainly no positive interest. Like that you wouldn't have, it would be the tragedy of the commons multiplied by infinity. Like you're not connected to the world, you have no investment in it, it's not significant to you, it's just a place for you to manifest whatever chaos you want to. Again, that's not a place you want to be. And if you were in that situation and you were for whatever reason interested in creating this fantasy and like being wholesome and virtuous and whatever, what would be the cause of that interest? That interest would come from somewhere. So we don't want this disconnected, uncaused will. We want a connection. We want to be connected to the world. So free will, in becoming reactionary against the ideas of determinism, and so remembering like Spinoza saying all your thoughts and interests are caused and therefore determined. People didn't like hearing that because of all the things they thought it might mean, which we'll get into. It doesn't mean those things. But free will, from that reactionary position, became the idea that our will should not be caused, which would mean it would be disconnected from any causation, and therefore the reality of our lives and our bodies. So free will went off the rails of anything of value in its technical meaning by becoming contrary to determinism. An uncaused and therefore undetermined will, a completely free will, is an insignificant will. An uncaused will, a completely free will, is an ineffective will. We don't want an uncaused and disconnected will. We want a will that's connected to and therefore caused by, but also part of and therefore can act on, the chain of causation of the world, or the web of causation, including our body and mind. Significance comes from being connected and attentive to the world and participating in creating causes and being able to be affected by causes so you know what's needed, you know what's relevant. Even if that the creation that you're making, the will that you're exerting, is in response to a need, which would be a cause and is therefore determined in some way, that's still what we want. Don't react to the word determined. Don't be like, uh-oh, it's determined, so that's bad. You want to be connected. Connected and determined turn out to be pretty close to the same thing. We want significance, including significant choice, significant impact on our lives and reality. So we do want some degree of a determined will, because that's a connected and therefore effective and significant will. We want a significant effect on the future. The ideas of determinism have seemed to take this away, which is why we've clung to the poorly formulated ideas of free will. Fortunately, denying significant effect on the future is in no way a necessary element of determinism. It's actually contrary to the reality we are talking about. Unfortunately, many people who supposedly support determinism have said they believed that determinism makes us insignificant and we don't have choice over the future. They don't know what they're talking about, as we'll show. The issue here comes up with our inability to see beyond time. And that's just a fact. We can't, well, usually we can't see beyond time. But we have to try to guess and theorize and talk about a reality beyond time, because we're starting through various ways to think, oh, that probably exists. So that's what our next part is going to be about, is talking about this reality beyond time and talking about how we're getting tangled up in thinking about it incorrectly, and why this helps to resolve the issue.